Welcome. I'm giving you a very special live stream today. This is the kind of content that I don't normally share on my public forum because it's the kind of content that I usually drill into with my mentoring clients. But I want to talk a little bit to businesses broadly using a private practice example of how you might get through financially or how you might not get through financially during this particular period of crisis. And I also feel it's an important message, I guess, for our community to understand why they might be meeting some resistance from private practices around the issue of bulk billing. Now, this is a really touchy subject in my profession, in the psychology profession, in the mental health professions more broadly, but also across the whole health profession, the issue of bulk billing. And a lot of people don't actually understand what bulk billing is. So I'm going to talk about that. And I'm also going to talk about, from a business perspective, and especially from a private practice perspective, what we're actually talking about when we expect health professionals to bulk bill as the bulk of their billing practice. Now, I really encourage, my mantra, especially in this day and age, in this particular climate that we've got going at the moment, my advice to people is to take a client-by-client, session-by-session approach. Some people are able to continue with you charging your normal fees. Some people have lost their jobs, and some people are a bit ambivalent about engaging in therapy. And now's a good time to be talking about whether or not it's something they still need to be doing, and certainly if they do need to be doing it, how they might go about doing that in a changed financial climate. So one thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to give you a blanket answer of what you need to do for your business right now that should be a business-wide policy. What I'm going to be doing is giving you some advice for your business around understanding some of the pressures that you might be feeling. There's been a lot of debate within a lot of social media forums, within a lot of platforms, about this particular issue about bulk billing, but about billing practices more broadly. So what I thought I might do was actually drag out my whiteboard and give you a little bit of a tiptoe through the tulips of some of the billing concepts. First, what is bulk billing? So if we're talking here about, in Australia, the Medicare system here in Australia, which is a really broad support network of options for health, supported health with government funding. So I guess in America you'd call it co-pay, and you'd probably be thinking more about insurance companies where the client pays a portion of the fee and the insurance company pays the rest. In Australia, we've got two options with our government support for mental health care and other healthcare services where there are Medicare items available. So we can either have the client pay our normal fee, whatever our normal fee is, and everyone will have a different fee because everyone's in a different marketplace in their community. Everyone has different levels of experience, different levels of qualification, different professions even within the mental health services. So fees vary widely. So the one option is to charge your normal fee, and then you might choose to utilise a Medicare item number that can then be processed and a rebate goes back to the client. So the clinician gets paid their fee and the client gets some money back from the government. That's how most of us these days do most of our billing in the mental health setting anyway. Now, the second option is called bulk billing. Now, in the olden days when I started in private practice, bulk billing actually meant something. We understood what it meant because you actually billed in bulk is how it worked. So you would see your client, you would have the client fill in a form. You would fill in lots of information on the handwritten form. It was in triplicate with carbon paper in between each sheet. And I think it was a green form. You'd pull out the green form and give that to the client, I think. Maybe that went to the government, I can't remember. And then at the end of the day or the end of the week, you'd send all the forms to the government in bulk, and then they would pay you in bulk. Now, the issue with bulk billing is the government won't pay you your normal fee. The government will only pay you the amount of money that they would give the client as their portion. So, most psychologists in Australia are linked to a rebate amount of about $86. So whatever their standard fee is, if the client is paying their standard fee and then getting a rebate, they get about $86 back in their bank account. If a psychologist chooses to bulk bill instead of getting their standard fee, they will only get the $86. Now, where this is really, really important is, and I'm going to take you now to some figures, because what's really important to understand is just how low bulk billing is compared to recommended fees for mental health care, and the fact that not all clinicians actually charge the recommended fee. In fact, most don't. Most charge less than the recommended fee. Now, I want to talk you through what the recommended fee is and how it was derived. Now, in your business, if you're not a mental health professional, I want you thinking about things. I want you to try and translate what I'm about to talk about into your own language. So I want you thinking about, if all mental health professionals were forced to bulk bill, a good analogy might be a bookstore that has to pay all their staff, cover all their overheads, order in all their books, do all those things, but then someone outside, an outside body, says they have to sell all their books at cost. So they're only able to cover the cost of purchasing the book. They've got no other means of covering the cost of having all the staff and paying all the bills and keeping the lights on and paying their rent and electricity and cleaners and all the rest of it. So that's the analogy we're talking about here. So if you're not a mental health professional, hold on, because I still want you to understand some of these concepts, because it might help you understand some of the intricacies in your profession, whatever that might be, or in your business, whatever that might be. All right, so let's have a little bit of a chat about the recommended fee for psychology and where that comes from. So I have my handy dandy whiteboard. You should see me. I wish there was like a long shot of me. I've got two kids on couches right in front of me here reading. One's reading a book half naked. The other one's playing Minecraft half naked. And I've got stuff everywhere. But bear with me. We'll keep the professional tone. So I've got my figures here. And what I've got, here we go. Right, first and foremost is the recommended fee. Now, I've possibly got these slightly incorrect, but that doesn't really matter. The detail isn't important because I pulled them out of my memory. So roughly $251. I'm always saying it's $256. It's possibly only $251. But the recommended fee for psychology, $251. What is that fee? Where did that fee magically come from? That's a fee that was put together by the Australian Psychological Society, and many years ago I read an article or saw a talk or something about how they came to what fee they recommended we charge. So the APS, the Australian Psychological Society, determined through lots of clever things with lots of economic modelling that the fee that they recommend, which wasn't $251 back then, it was whatever it was back then, was comprised of two core components. The first component is to cover the costs of running your practice, keeping the lights on, paying any staff that you might have, like administrative staff, paying for virtual assistants if you have a virtual administrative support, buying any testing materials, all the things, buying the cups, the tea bags for the tea room, all of the costs that go into running a private practice was one part of that recommended fee. The rest of it was to pay you a salary as a clinician. So what's really important to understand is the recommended fee of $251, that's not per hour, that's per client. And psychologists see, on average, about 5, 6, 7 clients a day. Some people see 8, some people see 4, but on average, about 6 clients a day. And the APS tells us that $251 needs to be charged in order to cover our running costs and pay ourselves a salary. So that's a roughly 50-50 split. So if we look at that a bit closer, we can see that that's roughly $125, not per hour, but per client, to cover off on all of our costs. So paying our staff members, paying our administrative support staff, and all the other costs that go with renting our premises and all that stuff. And roughly $125 per client to pay the clinician. It might not be me, it might be someone I've employed, to cover their salary. $125 per client. Now, my accountant, on the other hand, tells me a very simple calculation for how you need to be running your costings. He tells me something very simple. if you have a staff member in any business, if you have a staff member, they need to generate triple what you pay them in order to cover off on them being there. Because you need 1/3 to cover costs, 1/3 to pay the staff member, and 1/3 for profit. Now, before we all start pulling out our pitchforks and having a bit of a complaint about the word profit, I want you to understand what profit means to a business owner, whether that's a sole trader or a group practice owner or a multinational. What profit means is that if I was an employee, I get paid, and then my profit as an employee is that I get paid sick time and I get paid holiday time. So as an employer, the profit that comes into a business is like the business having paid sick leave and the business having paid holiday time. It puts money aside for, let's call it, a pandemic. There's opportunities for the business to grow and invest in new directions. There's all sorts of things that profit goes towards. It rarely goes into the pocket of the business owner. Let me put it that way, okay? So our model tells us that the APS recommended fee of $251 per client breaks down to about $84. $84 to cover costs, $84 to cover the clinician, and $84 to put something aside. Okay, what happens if now most people don't charge that amount, right? So $84 per client is not a lot of money to put towards business costs. But what if we don't charge that? So I think most psychologists fall somewhere between we'll call it an average of around about $200 a session. Some are less, some are much less, some are more, some are much more. Now, I'm not going to go into the modelling of that, but already it means we've got, if we go a third, a much smaller amount of money to go around. But then what happens if we bulk bill? Oh yes, let's talk about that chestnut, right? So, okay, on the APS's advice of the $251 going towards our costs and our salary, then if we bulk bill, lo and behold, what do we see? Okay, I'm going to talk about clinical psychs first. Don't worry, general psychs, you get in there, and I'll explain what a general psychologist is. And I'm also going to talk about another health profession too. I am a clinical psychologist. I am the only clinical psychologist as of 5 p.m. tonight in my practice because I have sold my Hobart practice, and today was my last day of owning my Hobart practice, and I've been doing everything all day that I can to be distracted from thinking about that because I can't be there to celebrate and cheer them on for being awesome. Stay on target. Right. Clinical psychologists, the rebate. So the rebate to the client. So if the client pays their fee and the rebate that the clinical psychologist attracts for the client is $125 thereabouts. So it means the client pays their fee and the government gives them about $125 back in their pocket. If the clinical psychologist bulk billed, they would only get $125. Okay, that's what the clinician would get paid from the government, or the practice would get paid from the government for that client. So let's follow the same logic that the APS has given us with what it costs to run a practice and apply that in a bulk billing setting. Bear with me. So all of a sudden, if we're going, well, that's going to cover both our practice costs and our salaries at about 50-50, that means we've only got $63 to cover per client to cover all of our running costs, and only $63 per client to cover paying our clinician. Now I'm going to stop right here for a second and say all of my clinicians are employed. So they don't get paid per client, they get paid whether clients turn up or not. So it's really important to understand that from a broader business perspective, your billing really impacts how you're able to employ staff and keep them employed. Across my two teams, while I had two teams, I now have one, there were 3 admin staff who don't generate business. They keep all the things working, right? They keep everything running. So $63 per client is not an awful lot of money to keep all those wheels turning. Now, if we go to my accountant's model, that comes down to $42 to cover all costs, $42 to pay the clinician, and $42 to put aside. Not a lot of money. Now, now it starts getting ugly. So I'm going to try and because I can't keep shrinking down, this is ridiculous. So the next layer of that is $86 or thereabouts for general psychologists, $86 if they bulk bill. Now $86, we follow the modelling on the APS's recommendation that the recommended fee should cover our running costs and cover a salary for the clinician. We've suddenly only got $43 for each of those two components of running our business. If we follow my accountant's advice, you've got $29 per client to cover your running costs, $29 to pay your clinician, $29 to pay your clinician, let that sink in, and $29 to put aside for a rainy day. So already we're starting to see this model is not going to cover, either on the advice from the Australian Psychological Society or on the advice of sensible accountants, any sustainable business, especially once you get beyond a sole practitioner. I know for some sole practitioners who work at very low running costs, some do all their own admin or they do all of their own stuff, they can keep their overheads really low. Some can keep their overheads really, really low. But even then, if you're doing all of your own administration, if you're charging a reasonable fee, you can pay for an administrative support person to do a lot of that work for you, so you can spend more time with your family, or you can spend more time going to the gym, or you can spend more time practicing some self-care so you don't burn out. So 86. Now I want to tell you a story. So in my Hobart team, we have a mental health occupational therapist. She is highly skilled, highly trained. She is all the qualifications from occupational therapy and has a master's in counselling. Love her to bits, brilliant clinician. Guess what the rebate is for mental health occupational therapists? It is not $125. It is not $86. It is $54. So let's just see what the APS recommends. So the APS recommends that our fee, $251 recommended fee, should cover practice costs and salaries. But if we're bulk billing everybody, that leaves $27 per client to cover off on running costs and $27 to pay the clinician. But if we're following my accountant's advice and putting something aside, $18 to cover running costs, $18 to cover her salary, and $18 to put aside. Bottom line, if we were to fully bulk bill for someone like a mental health OT, I would have to retrench her. There would be no job for her. She would not be able to help anybody because she would be unemployed. How does that work? So from a broader community perspective, I want you to dearly understand that when a clinician chooses to bulk bill you, they're doing so because they're making a decision from a values-based perspective. They've thought about what's important to them. They've thought about how much therapy might be important to you. They've weighed up in their own minds whether or not they can afford to do this for you. And if they choose not to, it's because they've figured out that they can't afford to do that. Okay, so when government and other bodies state that things need to be bulk billed, it puts a huge amount of pressure on clinicians to make decisions that might not be in the interests of their business surviving. So at the moment, we've been very, very lucky in that the government has scrambled, and I absolutely applaud the efforts of the Australian Psychological Society and other professional bodies to lobby government, and they've been working extremely hard to do that. And I also applaud our government coming forward so quickly with initiatives that otherwise would have taken 10 years to nut out. And they've released, there's a lot of telehealth Medicare items now available, but at the moment the edict is they must be bulk billed. Now most clinicians are working from home. Well, a lot of clinicians are now working from home providing telehealth, and all the telehealth items must be bulk billed. So what it's saying is, it's saying to clinicians, well, you're not going to get your normal income. You're not even going to get enough money to pay yourself. You're not even going to get enough money to pay yourself and keep your business running. Be grateful that you're getting anything at all. That's kind of how it's being put to people at the moment. Now, clinicians have the choice to say to each client, and I really stress this is important and a really important conversation, to talk to each client about what can you afford. Can you afford to pay your normal fee and perhaps claim something from private health? Can you afford to pay perhaps a discounted private fee? And if we keep Medicare out of it, we don't need to bulk bill, we can still run a viable business, and I can still afford to see you for the duration of your therapy. It's not common for mental health professionals to have business related and that level of business related conversation with the community or with their clients. But in these changing times and this time of stress, we really need to understand that sometimes those conversations need to happen, and they might need to happen on a session by session basis because everything's changing. So we've had a little bit of a whisper, a little bit of an exciting whisper that the need to bulk bill, or the rule around bulk billing those Medicare items, might be lifted for us soon. And if that happens, it's great news for the community, it's great news for mental health professionals, because what it means is that we can just engage in our normal billing practices where you pay a fee and the government gives you that rebate money back into your bank account. And everything starts feeling a little bit more tolerable, both for you to get enough therapy for if that's what you need, for you, the clinician, to run your business in a way that's sustainable. Because we had a Prime Minister telling us just this morning, get used to it. It's going to be like this for 6 months. Whether it is or it isn't, the idea is we need to be thinking long term. So whatever decisions we make for our business today, we need to be thinking strategically about how we structure our billing practices, how we structure our business directions in terms of multiple revenue streams. We need to not just be reliant on one single source of revenue. So for practices that are really, really reliant on clients linked to Medicare and not open or haven't pursued other revenue streams, it's going to be really hard for them. Not impossible, certainly not if they lift the rule around bulk billing, but it's harder to get your fee up to here. Your average fee needs to be closer to that. You're not going to charge necessarily each client that fee. You might, depending on your business and your particular model. But my point being, if you've got multiple revenue streams and they're billed appropriate to the structure you've got with them, so people who pay on the day might be paying one fee, people who organisations who are going to pay you to provide some services and might not be paying you for 30 days, their fee is higher because you've got to generate an invoice, you've got to chase it up, you've got to have all the admin staff to support you to do all those things. So you need to pay the full recommended fee. You need multiple revenue streams to keep this thing going for yourself. My point today, a little bit of a public service announcement, I guess, is understand what pressure clinicians are under when they're being asked or being told to bulk bill. Understand that there are options to bulk billing. At the moment, if you use certain Medicare item numbers, you have to bulk bill them until that changes. But you don't have to use the Medicare item numbers. You can actually choose, in consultation with your client, have a conversation with them, communicate with them. These are our options. Where do you fall within these available options? Make it client-centered and client-focused. And I think most of us are aware that all businesses are struggling. Now, mental health is deemed an essential service, but at the moment we're at risk. So many of us are at risk financially if this bulk billing model was to be, upheld. And then what? Essential services start having to close. So there's your lesson. There's some numbers thrown your way. Have a think about when you're, yes, I can see from Sonali that the mental health social work is 74. Yeah, I jumped straight through to OTs because it's so low, but I know social workers are somewhere between general psychs and OTs. And I did promise to explain what a general psych is. There's no such thing as a general psychologist. Unlike medical professionals where general practitioner is a specialised area of medicine, there is no such thing as a general psychologist. There is a general psychology rebate. And unfortunately, and I'm not going to get into the politics, so please don't try and draw me into it, but unfortunately, when Medicare was first set up, there was a split created within the profession, and clinical psychologists were given special treatment with a higher rebate. The initial I think the initial plan was that only clinical psychologists were going to have a rebate at all, but with lots of lobbying from various points, other psychologists, so all other psychologists were lumped into one category with this lower rebate, and that's, you know, a very sore point within the profession, and it's created a lot of division within the profession. And obviously, when we're now talking about circumstances where bulk billing is being dictated by certain quarters, it adds salt to that wound. So, have a think about your business. Have a think about your views on how you're billing for things, especially during this particular time. Have a think about what pressures you're under by what other people are saying, and make a choice to not listen to big noisy voices coming from certain directions if they're not feeding your growth. And by growth, I mean your capacity to survive during difficult times, your capacity to come out the other side, your capacity to successfully hibernate your business if that's what you choose to do, given the current government speak around business hibernation, and to awaken at the end of this pandemic crisis with a business that's still viable. The whole issue about business fees, it is about business owners choosing structures that support their obligations to their staff and to keeping their doors open to serve their communities. So I hope that's been helpful. I know I've got lots of comments and questions, and I will answer them. I'll come back to those. But I'm now going to go and feed my children their dinner. Have a fabulous night, and I'll talk to you all again very, very soon. Bye for now.